So we continue in the book of Mark, and last week we finished Mark chapter 5, and so we go on with Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6. Last week we talked about Jesus coming back to the shore, and a man named Jairus comes up and wants him to heal his daughter, and then a woman comes, touches him, gets healed, and he goes to Jairus' house and heals his daughter. And then in Mark chapter 6, verse 1, it says, "And he went away from there and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him." So Jesus is traveling back to his hometown, visit the place that he grew up. Nazareth was about as tiny a town as you could be in. It's interesting. Nazareth is never mentioned in the Old Testament, not even once. The population was estimated to be maybe under 500 people. It was absolutely tiny. Not only was Nazareth incredibly small, but it did not have a very good reputation. If you remember the first chapter of the Gospel of John, when Philip is telling Nathanael about Jesus, he says that Jesus of Nazareth, and Nathanael says, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" It had this reputation where it's like, you don't go there, just nothing good happens there, I guess. And the beginning of verse 2 tells us that when Jesus went visiting to Nazareth, he went to the synagogue in Nazareth. And if you remember last week with the story with the man named Jairus, Jairus was a ruler of his local synagogue. And one of his many responsibilities was to organize which rabbi was going to teach on a particular, Sabbath day. And so I would assume, the synagogue in Nazareth had a ruler of the synagogue. And, maybe when he heard that, the hometown boy's returning, hey, let's have him teach, teach a service. And that should have been a wonderful thing. Many times when I've gone back home to Massachusetts, to the church I grew up in, they asked me to preach, and they at least they seem like they enjoy it. I don't know if they tell me if they didn't, but they have the appearance of enjoying it, and it's usually a positive thing. However, when Jesus goes to his hometown to teach, things are not exactly what you'd expect. Now, it's important to note that this is not the first time that Jesus visited Nazareth. In Luke chapter 4, towards the beginning of Jesus' ministry, he went back to Nazareth to teach, and a large group of people tried to throw him off a cliff. Now, that doesn't sound like a very good homecoming. That has never been my experience preaching. When I went back to my home church, they didn't try to throw me off a bridge or anything like that. Luke 4, I think Luke 4, starting in verse 16, it's crazy. They literally wanted to throw him off a cliff. But he obviously was like, no, that's not happening. I'm God. So yeah, that didn't work well. But now, so this story in Mark chapter 6 is about 1.5 to 2 years later, he comes back to Nazareth. And let's see if the response is any better. Now, there are some people that think that the visit to Nazareth in Luke chapter 4 is actually the same story that we're reading in Mark chapter 6. And they would say that Luke and Mark are saying the same story, but they're just using different details. Because the details are strikingly different in some ways, which is a very common thing. Matthew, Mark, and Luke have about 90% of the same stories, and a lot of them, they will have different details in each story. But everything, when I was looking this up, I really think that these are two different stories. I think that in Luke 4, that was towards the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and I think Mark 6 is about 2 years later, and Jesus is coming back to his hometown. So here's Jesus. He's in Nazareth. He's teaching in the synagogue. Should be a wonderful time. And he is saying things that no other man has said in a way that no other man has said them. He has a wisdom and a discernment that is just not from this world. And on top of that, he's doing miracles. Now, we look at this, right? It's 2025, okay? And we know exactly why Jesus' words are unlike anybody else's. We know why, right? We know Jesus is God. He's all-knowing. He's all-wise. Of course, his teaching is going to be unmatched. But put yourself in the mind of somebody in Nazareth back in this time. They have no clue that Jesus is God at all. So let's see their reaction. So Mark chapter 6, verse 2, it says, "And on the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished, saying, 'Where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands?'" So the people are in total shock. They have never heard any rabbi speak like this. And that's saying something, because back in this culture, the Jews produced a large number of amazing teachers, amazing rabbis. They really did. And so for somebody to stand out among the pool of rabbis, that was impressive. For somebody to be able to be at the top of the list. So this is quite an accomplishment. And the people would have also been in shock because Jesus never had any formal rabbinical training. If you wanted to be a rabbi, you were taught and mentored by a rabbi. That's why the people said, "Where did this man get these things? What in the world?" Because he wasn't taught and trained by another rabbi. This is something that people end up saying about the apostles in the book of Acts, right? When the apostles start preaching and saying amazing things, doing amazing things, the people are like, "These guys didn't go to Bible college. How in the world are they doing this? They weren't trained formally." They actually had something way better than formal rabbinical training. And so here's where we come to a crossroads, right? After the people of Nazareth are amazed at the teaching of Jesus, there's two responses they can have, right? The first response they could have would be a positive one. They could just simply be proud and excited. Our own hometown Jesus is now the wisest rabbi in all of Israel. I mean, my goodness, it's something to be proud of, right? They could have put a sign at the entrance to Nazareth, when you cross those weird, obscure towns, and it says, "Home of Billy Thompson, the best bowler this side of the Mississippi." And you're like, who the heck is that? They could have put a sign in the beginning of Nazareth saying, "Home to Jesus, the wisest rabbi," right? They could have been their claim to fame. They could have had tours of the famous Nazareth, right? However, they do not have a positive response. Verse 3 is their response to this. So let's go through what they say here. The first thing they say is not this the carpenter? Now, the word Mark uses, whenever you see the occupation of Jesus mentioned, it's usually the word carpenter. But that word, it's more than that. It basically means builder. So it would have involved woodworking, but it could have also involved stonemasonry. So Jesus most likely did do carpentry work, but he probably did more than that. He might have did stonework. It's basically kind of a general word for somebody who's a builder, right? But notice they say, "Is not this the carpenter?" So first they said, "How did this man get these things?" And then they said, "Wait a second, is not this is the carpenter, right? He's just a carpenter." I mean, it's very derogatory. And the fact that they're highlighting his occupation is very contrasted with him being a teacher. They're like, "No, this is the carpenter. He's not a teacher." And they say, isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us? And so he obviously is the son of Mary, but that would have also been very derogatory. So this is a culture where you were known by who your father was. So if you were the son or daughter of somebody, then the son or daughter of whatever your father's name is. So when they say, "This is the son of Mary," isn't it? That's very derogatory. If you know that the culture tells us that their response is not good. They're referring to him as just a carpenter. They're calling him the son of Mary, and it's just they're not having a good reaction to him. And then if you look at the last part of that verse, it says, and they took offense at him. So that makes it very clear. They saw what he was doing. They saw how he was. Then they kind of thought about him in their own minds, and it offended them who this guy was. What? And the word Mark uses for offense is a verb. It literally means stumbling block. Jesus became their stumbling block. What does that mean? Well, if you remember a while back, I preached over 1 Corinthians 1:23, and Paul says that we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews. So how is Christ crucified a stumbling block to the Jews? Well, the Jews believed that the Messiah would come and just be victorious, right? They thought of him as a political leader. They thought he would come and take and just destroy the Roman Empire and take control of the nation back. That's what they thought. So to be crucified meant you failed. You didn't conquer the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire conquered you, and you lost. So they would have looked at a crucified Messiah would have been an oxymoron for the Jews. There's no way they could have accepted the idea that their Messiah was going to be crucified. And so when they thought about that, they stumbled over it, and they could not believe that Jesus was actually the Messiah. So in Mark, what's the stumbling block for the people of Nazareth? Well, the stumbling block is Jesus himself. What about Jesus? What they say about him? Isn't this just a carpenter, the son of Mary? You might say, well, yeah, but he's so much more than that, isn't he? He's the wisest of all rabbis, and he's a miracle worker who happens to be the Son of God. So why would they not accept him as who he truly is? It's because they don't want to accept him as who he truly is. That is the age-old problem today, even. People do not want the Jesus that's in the pages of Scripture. They want their own Jesus that they can make in their own image because it makes people feel better to have Jesus be like them instead of having Jesus be Jesus. Those in Nazareth, they could have accepted who he was. And best case scenario, they recognize him as the Messiah and they all get saved and it's wonderful, right? That would have been great. But they rejected who Jesus actually is, and they only saw him as what they wanted him to be. No, you're not the teacher, Jesus. You're not this amazing rabbi. You are just the carpenter, the son of Mary of Nazareth. That's all that you are. That's what they wanted him to be. And so the identity that they wanted Jesus to have caused them to stumble and fall and made it impossible for them to have any sort of faith in who Jesus actually is, which made it impossible for them to receive what Jesus may have wanted to give them. And it's so easy for any one of us to have stumbling blocks that prevent us from receiving what Jesus wants to give us. And many times the things we stumble over are from our own self-centeredness. Many times the things we stumble over are our own desires, our own assumptions. And when God is trying to tell us what he wants, if it doesn't line up with what we want, we choose to go with our own desires and we stumble over them and we end up not being able to have any real faith because what, are we going to have faith in ourselves? What can we do? Why would we have faith in anything that we have the ability over? And the worst part, and I have seen this happen, is when someone decides that they prefer their own way, but they still want to feel like they're obeying God. And they want everybody around them to perceive that they're obeying God, so they just stop praying about things. They never seek the Lord. That way, they can't ever hear God's voice, so they can pretend that their own desire is the voice of God. Sounds a lot like idolatry, doesn't it? We must never assume that what we want to do is automatically pleasing to God. To assume we know exactly what God wants without even letting him tell us is a dangerous game to play. We must always be seeking to hear the voice of God and be willing to throw away our own desires whenever they conflict with God's desires. And that is easier said than done, but it's what we must do. So now we see the perspective of those in Nazareth, right? That's how their perspective. But what's the perspective of Jesus in this story? Jesus doesn't say a whole lot, but his actions are very loud in this story. So if we move on, verses 4 through 6, which is the rest of the story here. It's not a very long story. And Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household." And he could do no mighty work there except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went about among the villages teaching. So Jesus, who knows exactly what's going on, he shares the thing that Jesus says, a prophet is not without honor except in his own home. That's in quotations, because that was a kind of a saying that they had back then. It was kind of like a proverb that they had back then. And I tell you what, I spent a lot of time thinking about that saying, because it's true even today. Sometimes it seems like everybody loves you except the people in your own family. Some people, that's their experience. The people you should be the closest with are the people that you find yourself being the farthest from. Because sometimes we do things to cause that, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes you try to be loving and kind, but for some reason your family refuses to actually. I mean, that's why the Bible says sometimes a friend sticks closer than a brother, because sometimes that's the case. Sometimes the only people that don't listen to you are the ones in your own family. And I tell you what, I spent a lot of time thinking and praying and saying, why? Why is that? Because I don't really have an answer. Because it doesn't make sense. Why is it the people that you should be the closest to sometimes are the ones that reject you the most? I don't really know. I mean, the saying kept coming up in a few different places. Familiarity breeds contempt. I don't know if that. I really don't have an answer as to why sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you can't reach. And you see that a lot when you have unbelieving family members. You might have people very close to you in your family who are lost without Jesus, and you've tried to be a witness and they reject it. But if somebody that they don't know talks to them, they're receptive. And it's like, I don't have an answer for that. But even Jesus experienced it. Okay, so if this has been your experience, you're with Jesus on this, because even his own family. I mean, there's other passages in John where his own brothers and sisters said, "Jesus, you're nuts. Stop it." They wouldn't get on board with anything he was doing. Now, if this was anybody else but Jesus, okay, if someone else was doing ministry and they went to their hometown and this happened, they would probably get very discouraged and they'd feel hurt. And since no one has any faith, they would probably just get up and leave. Just walk away, thinking it was a waste of time to even come here. And Mark flat out says Jesus was amazed. Jesus was amazed at their unbelief. And it says he could do no miracles there. Now we need to be careful. That doesn't mean Jesus was not able. It's not like he tried and it wasn't working. When Jesus rewards faith, when you see people they put it all on the line. Last week, right? Jairus, the woman who was bleeding, they risked everything to put their faith in Jesus, and he rewarded their faith. So for Jesus to come to a group of people that reject him, to just do miracles would kind of be contrary to his mission. He's not going to do what's contrary to his mission. So it's not that he wasn't able, but when it comes to what his mission was, he wasn't just going to reward their flat out, basically spitting in his face and saying, "No, carpenter, get out of here." You see that too. They only saw him for what he was when they knew him. We see that. You see that too, right? You grow up in a place and you were not a good person, and you leave and you change. Maybe God changes you and you go back to your hometown, and the people that you grew up with, they refuse to see you as a changed person. All they do is see you as the screw up you were when you grew up with them. Same thing that Jesus is going through. They refused, not that they could call him a screw up, but they refused to see him as what he was. So here's Jesus, right? Anybody else would have just been like, see ya, I'm not putting up with this garbage, I'm gone. But Jesus does not do that. And there's one part of these last few verses that speaks volumes about the mindset of Jesus in these circumstances. Remember, for the most part, Jesus has been doing many miracles in all these towns, okay? People have been coming up to him with actual faith. It talks about Jesus going to a town or village, and it says he healed everybody in the town. Hundreds, thousands of people. Unbelievable. So to come to his hometown and see no faith at all could have been a huge blow to him, and you might assume that Jesus would have just left immediately when he saw that nobody had any faith. But then in verse 5, it says he couldn't do anything except he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. That's huge. That really is huge there. If Jesus was amazed at the unbelief of the people, and we know that it was almost everybody, since Jesus couldn't do any miracles, we know that it was almost everybody that didn't believe, how did he end up healing people? How did he end up finding people to heal? Because he looked for them. Jesus went there, nobody had faith, and his mindset was, surely there's at least one person here that I can touch. And Jesus wouldn't leave until he found the one person or two people that needed him. It's like the story of the parable of the shepherd. The 99 sheep, one goes missing, and the shepherd goes for the one. Jesus was in his hometown. They rejected him, but he still went for even the one or two people in there that did need him and that did put faith in him. And we need to realize with Jesus, even if it's one person, it's still worth it. You might think, he goes to a town and thousands of people get healed. He goes to this other town. There's only one person with faith, Jesus. Let's not waste our time. It wasn't a waste of time for Jesus to go to the one person. That's how valuable people are to Jesus, is that he will go through all of that garbage, preaching in his hometown, people rejecting him, people making fun of him, insulting him. He'll go through all of that for just a couple people. Because to him, everybody's worth it. It's like when God told Abraham he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And remember Abraham, Lord, if there's just a few people, if there's just 50, will you preserve them? Yes. If there's 40, if there's 30, Lord, if there's just 10 people, will you at least for 10 people not kill them? And God said, yeah, 10 people is worth it. And it makes you wonder, Abraham stopped at 10 people. It makes you wonder, what if Abraham had went lower and said, Lord, if there's just 2 people in there, will you preserve the city? I think God might have said yes to that, honestly. Because those 2 people that were not evil would have been worth it to him. Galatians 6:9, Paul says, let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. You will reap. You will see fruit, spiritual fruit, if you just don't give up and don't think anything's a waste. There's no such thing as wasted ministry. The word of God does not come back void. And Jesus believed that. So what kind of Christians are we going to be? What kind of church are we going to be? Will we give up at times because we're looking at things through human eyes, and when it appears nothing's working, we just give up? Or are we going to look at things through the eyes of faith and always believe that Jesus will give us a harvest no matter how impossible it looks? Over the years, I would hear this, that, pastors be like, oh yeah, we started to have prayer meeting at our church, but no one showed up, so we quit having it. And I remember thinking, No one showed up, so you stopped praying? Are you kidding me? If your prayer meeting was about attendance, then it was never about prayer to begin with, if you care about who comes. It doesn't matter. If you're going to give up, why should God do anything if you're just going to stop seeking him? And I want to close with this passage right here. Jesus said in Matthew 9:35, it says, Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, healing every disease and every affliction. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. You know why I think the workers were few? I think it's because they gave up. As soon as it didn't look the way they wanted it to, as soon as it didn't look like it was going to be fruitful, they just gave up. And I think that happens today. And that's true today. There are so many people around this church harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And, I got to be honest with you. And I don't want to sound like I'm being derogatory towards anyone or anything, but I seriously doubt that there are enough workers out in the mission field of this community. I seriously doubt that there are enough people seeking to save the lost in this town. And I believe God's calling us to do that. And so I'm done with this now, but there's a lot of things here. Obviously, we need to have the mindset of Jesus that there's no such thing as something too small to seek to be. One person is worth a lot of work. But before we even get to that point, we can't be like the people of Nazareth. We have to believe and put all our faith and all our hope in Jesus. And so we're going to close with, I think it's number 436.